Before we step deeper into this nightmare, subscribe now and tell me in the comments if you'd dare take a job like this. It was 1998 when I first stepped into that narrow apartment on the east side of town. The case had been closed for weeks, yet the air felt heavy, suffocating, like a secret pressed against my chest. Police tape still clung to the door frame, brittle and curling with dust. I should have turned away then, but I didn't. The crime itself was brutal, whispered about in the city but buried in paperwork by the time I arrived. A man had been found torn open in his own living room, and the blood had painted the floorboards like spilled ink. The neighbors spoke of screams that didn't sound human, but no one wanted to remember. My job was simple: erase the memory the room carried. The scent hit me first: copper, damp wood, and something else. A rot that clung to my throat. No matter how long a body is gone, its shadow lingers in the air. I put on gloves, mask, boots, the uniform of someone who erases tragedy. But as I unzipped my cleaning bag, something inside me whispered, this wasn't just another cleanup. The floor was soaked dark, though the body had been removed long ago. Stains like rivers had seeped between the boards, blackened at the edges where time had hardened them. I poured solvent, the strongest I carried, and watched it bubble faintly against the wood. For a moment, I thought it was working. The sound came next, soft, almost gentle, like dripping water. Yet the pipes were dry, the faucets turned off. I followed it with my eyes, scanning the room until I saw it. A thin red line crawling from the corner, spreading slow, deliberate, like a vein being drawn by an invisible hand. My chest tightened. This wasn't possible. I scrubbed harder, kneeling with my weight pressed down, scrubbing until my arms burned. Each swipe left the boards pale for a second, but the moment I pulled back, red seeped through again. The wood itself seemed to bleed. I froze, breathing hard, staring at what felt less like a stain and more like something alive. The silence was absolute, broken only by the squeak of my brush against the floor. Even the city outside seemed muted, as though the apartment existed in its own sealed world. My skin prickled, sweat sliding beneath the mask, though the room was cold. I felt as though something was watching me, but there was nowhere for anyone to hide. The walls bore faint splatters, but they seemed almost painted there, deliberate strokes across the plaster. The case file said the man had died quickly, but the shapes told another story. They looked like symbols, half-formed, as if someone had written in blood but lost the strength to finish. I tried not to look too closely. I reminded myself I was a cleaner, not an investigator, not a priest. My work was to erase, not to question. But the longer I stared, the more the stains seemed arranged, forming patterns only visible at a distance. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, and when I looked again, they were just random splatters. Or maybe that's what they wanted me to believe. By the time I packed up, hours had slipped by, and yet the floor looked no different than when I arrived. My solvents were wasted, brushes ruined, gloves torn. I sat back on my heels, chest aching with exhaustion, staring at the room that refused to forget. It was as though the apartment itself wanted to keep the memory alive. As I reached for the light switch, something caught my eye. In the corner where the man's body had been found, the wood gleamed wet, as though freshly painted. The liquid shimmered under the bulb, impossibly fresh, impossibly red. And then before my eyes, another drop fell, splattering onto the boards with a sound too sharp to ignore. That was when I realized something horrifying. The blood wasn't a stain at all. It wasn't history, and it wasn't memory. It was happening now. And in that moment, standing in the silence of that cursed apartment, I knew my first night on the job was far from over. I left the apartment that first night with my gloves still sticky, though I knew I had scrubbed them clean. The air outside was colder than before, sharp enough to sting my lungs as I breathed. Yet even in the open street, I swore I could still smell the copper tang. It clung to me like smoke after fire. The city was restless that night. Streetlights flickered, and a dog barked endlessly in the distance. I kept glancing at my hands, certain I would see red smeared across them, but they were bare, pale in the moonlight. I shook it off, told myself I was tired, told myself this was just another job. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. By morning, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion playing tricks on me. That's what cleaners do. We rationalized the impossible because admitting it would break us. When the call came from my supervisor to return, I hesitated. The landlord had complained. The stains were back, darker than ever. The second time, I brought stronger chemicals, the kind that melt through almost anything. I wanted to prove to myself that I could erase it all. Yet when I unlocked the door, the stench was worse than before. Thicker, choking. The floor looked as though it had been freshly painted in blood overnight. I gagged behind my mask and stepped inside, noticing something I hadn't before. The walls, they weren't just stained anymore. They were pulsing, not like a trick of the eye, but faintly, rhythmically, as if the plaster itself had a heartbeat. My hand trembled as I touched it, and I swore I felt warmth. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my bucket, but forced myself to keep going, to clean, to do my job. The sound of scrubbing echoed through the apartment, louder than it should have, almost mocking me. And beneath it, faint, steady, dripping, always dripping. At one point, I thought I heard voices. Faint, low, like whispers carried by static. I froze, brush in hand, straining to listen. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading. Someone, or something, was begging. I turned, but the room was empty. I told myself to ignore it, to push harder. My gloves burned as the chemicals seeped through tiny holes, stinging my skin, and still, the stains remained. But worse than that, they seemed to spread with each stroke, like I was feeding them instead of erasing them. My chest felt tight, panic rising, but I couldn't stop. If I failed again, I'd have to explain why. No one in this line of work admits defeat. We erase, no matter what it takes. I pressed harder, knuckles aching, until the wood cracked beneath me. That's when I saw it. The floorboard splintering revealed not just rot or dirt, but something moist, dark, shifting beneath, like veins crawling through the wood. The liquid welled up, bright and glistening, and I staggered back in horror. It wasn't just blood, it was alive. I slammed the board shut with my boot, my breath ragged, mask damp with sweat. My tools clattered to the floor as I backed toward the door. The apartment groaned around me, timbers straining, as though the building itself exhaled. I knew I couldn't stay, not another second. But when I yanked the door open, I froze. The hallway outside was gone. Instead, a wall of peeling wallpaper stretched endlessly, the same wallpaper from inside. The apartment had swallowed the world beyond it, leaving me trapped inside its rotting lungs. The bucket tipped, chemicals spilling across the wood, hissing as they burned. The smell was unbearable, acidic and raw, but the stains only spread wider, blooming across the boards like fresh wounds. It was mocking me, daring me to try again. I pressed myself against the wall, chest pounding, sweat freezing against my neck. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to run. Only walls, only blood, only the memory of screams that had never left this place. And then, somewhere deep inside the apartment, a door creaked open, a sound that didn't belong to any room I had seen. A sound that promised the stains weren't the only thing alive in here. The second night was supposed to be my last cleanup. Instead, it became the beginning of something I could never escape. The door creaked wider with a slowness that felt deliberate, like something on the other side wanted me to hear every second of its arrival. My breath caught, the sound too loud inside my mask. I didn't dare move, afraid even the smallest step would invite whatever lingered there closer. The faint glow leaking from the crack wasn't the warm amber of a lamp or the sterile white of a bulb. It was red, the color of fresh wounds, pulsing faintly as though it had a rhythm. I stared, paralyzed, as the light flickered in sync with the pounding in my chest. Every survival instinct screamed to run, yet my legs locked stiff, as if the floor beneath them had fused with my boots. I thought about shouting, but the silence of the apartment was so oppressive, so absolute, that my voice would have sounded like a trespass. When the dripping began again, it was louder, much louder. No longer just faint trickles in the corners, but heavy drops striking the floor in rapid succession. I turned toward the sound, and what I saw froze me. The ceiling itself had begun to bleed. Thick rivulets of dark red seeped from cracks above, winding down the plaster in jagged paths. I stumbled back, staring upward, my skin crawling as the droplets fell faster, splattering across my shoulders and mask. The taste of iron burned in my throat, even though I hadn't opened my mouth. I reached for my tools out of reflex, but the bucket, the brush, the chemicals, they seemed ridiculous now, laughable in the face of something that defied nature itself. What good were solvents against a house that bled? The red glow from the open door brightened, suddenly, spilling across the floorboards like a spreading fire. I shielded my eyes, but the light wasn't painful. It was alluring, beckoning, against my will. My body leaned forward, feet dragging toward it. The whispers returned, clearer this time. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, weaving into a chorus of words I couldn't fully understand. Yet beneath the static hiss, I caught fragments. My name, spoken as if remembered by strangers. I froze, the sound paralyzing me with dread. Every fiber of my being told me not to enter that room, not to look inside, but the pull was relentless, stronger with every heartbeat. My hand rose toward the doorknob, trembling violently, as though no longer under my control. Just before my fingers brushed the knob, a slam echoed through the apartment, so loud it rattled my bones. The red glow vanished in an instant, plunging the hallway back into dim, suffocating darkness. I staggered back, gasping, hand clutching my chest. But the silence that followed was worse than the whispers. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, deafening in the stillness. And then, a soft scratching, faint but unmistakable, from directly behind me. I turned slowly, every muscle rigid, to find the floorboards rippling beneath my boots. Not shifting from weight or cracks, but moving, alive, as though something beneath was clawing its way upward. The scratches grew louder, closer, desperate. My throat burned as I choked on a scream, stumbling backward toward the walls. The scratching stopped suddenly, leaving an awful silence hanging heavy in the room. Then, without warning, the boards split wide open, and a spray of dark liquid burst upward. It splashed across my visor, hot and metallic, making me recoil violently. I wiped at it with trembling hands, but the liquid smeared instead of clearing. The mask's plastic felt slick, almost alive, as though the blood itself clung to me. Panic took over. I ripped the mask off, gasping for clean air, but the scent that hit me was worse than anything before. Copper, decay, mold, and something sharp, chemical, like 1,000 deaths packed into one breath. I stumbled toward the door again, desperate for escape, but the knob twisted before I touched it. Slowly, silently, as if something on the other side had been waiting for me to try. The door inched open, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. Not the hallway, not the city, not anything recognizable, just void. My reflection shimmered faintly on its surface, warped, stretched, wrong. And then, from inside that endless black, something whispered, not a chorus this time, not static, but one clear, perfect voice. It was my own. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to blink, my own voice echoing back words I hadn't spoken. And in that moment, I knew the apartment wasn't just alive, it was speaking to me. I staggered out of the apartment when the door finally released me, collapsing against the cold brick wall of the street outside. My lungs heaved like I had been drowning, and my clothes clung to me with the stench of chemicals and blood. For a long moment, I just sat there trembling, unable to accept I was back in the world. The city lights should have comforted me, but they didn't. Neon signs flickered across empty sidewalks, and every shadow stretched longer than it should. Even out here, I swore I could still hear that whisper, the voice that had been mine but wasn't. It followed me like an echo I couldn't outrun. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that no job was worth this. But reality doesn't bend to fear. Rent was due, bills stacked higher than courage, and most of all, my family needed me. The paycheck from a single cleanup could keep food on the table. Turning away wasn't an option. At home, I tried to hide what I carried. My wife noticed first, the way my hands shook when I reached for my glass of water, the way I kept checking the windows as if something might be watching. I told her I was just tired. She didn't believe me, but she didn't press. That night, I sat by my daughter's door long after she had fallen asleep. I listened to her breathing, steady and soft, and told myself I was protecting her from nothing. But deep inside, I knew the nothing was already inside me. It clung to my skin, buried itself in my lungs, and whispered with my voice. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red glow bleeding through the cracks of a door that never truly shut. When I finally drifted, I dreamed of my reflection calling me closer, promising things I couldn't understand but desperately feared. Morning came like a curse. Sunlight searing my eyes though I hadn't really slept. My wife asked if I was going back. I lied and said no, though the call had already come from my supervisor. The stains had returned, spreading worse than ever. The landlord was furious. Someone had to fix it. I kissed my daughter's forehead before leaving, holding on to that warmth like a lifeline. Her innocence was the only thing that still reminded me of what was real. As I stepped outside, I swore I heard her murmur in her sleep. Not words, just soft sounds, but it was the exact same tone as the whispers in the apartment. The drive back was silent, radio off. The city outside my window blurred. My hands clenched the wheel so tight that my knuckles whitened. Each mile closer, the weight in my chest grew heavier, as though the apartment knew I was coming back and it was pulling me in. When I parked outside, the building looked smaller than before, shrunken, almost fragile. But I knew that was a lie. Inside those walls was something vast, something that couldn't be contained by bricks or wood. My hands trembled as I held the keys. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the front door. Images of my wife and daughter flashed in my mind. What if I never came back? What if the apartment didn't let me leave this time? My chest ached with fear, but I thought of their hungry faces, and I forced myself forward. The stairwell smelled of mildew and rust, but underneath it lingered that same copper tang. I climbed slowly, each step creaking as if warning me to turn back. The closer I got, the clearer I heard it, the faint, steady dripping that never stopped. At the apartment door, my hands shook so violently I dropped the keys. They clattered against the concrete, echoing too loudly in the stillness. My heart thudded painfully as I bent to pick them up, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly missed the lock. The second the door opened, the stench hit me harder than ever, almost knocking me backward. It wasn't just blood now. It was rot. Old wood, mildew, smoke, all fused into something unnatural. My stomach turned, bile rising, but I forced myself inside, and there it was, waiting. The stains had spread across the entire floor, reaching the walls, curling upward like vines. The apartment wasn't just remembering death anymore. It was growing it. As I stood there, frozen, I realized this wasn't just my nightmare. If I failed again, if I didn't understand what this place wanted, it would follow me home, to my wife, to my daughter. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid for them. The air inside the apartment pressed against me like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Each step I took sank into the floorboards, as though the wood wanted to consume me whole. The stains no longer felt like remnants of violence. They were veins, pulsing faintly beneath the surface. I crouched, brushing my glove across the nearest patch. It was warm, not just from trapped heat, but warm like flesh. The realization made bile rise in my throat. I stumbled back, knocking over my bucket, chemicals spilling and hissing uselessly against the red. The stains drank it in like water. The sound of dripping grew louder again. But now it wasn't from the ceiling. It came from beneath the floor, rhythmic, steady, like the slow pump of a heart. My chest constricted as I realized the impossible. This place wasn't haunted by death. It was alive. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The case file said the man had been killed in the living room, body torn open as though mauled by something unseen. No intruder, no weapon ever found. Police called it unsolved and buried it. But standing here now, I wondered if he hadn't been killed by someone. Maybe he had been consumed by the apartment itself. I scanned the room, looking for something, anything that explained why the blood returned night after night. That's when my eyes landed on the wall. The splatters I had dismissed before weren't random. They had connected, spread, forming shapes, letters. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't English, not anything I recognized, but the arrangement was deliberate. The symbols pulsed faintly, as though alive, as though watching me. I stepped closer despite myself, heart hammering, eyes tracing the shapes that seemed to rearrange if I looked too long. Then the whisper came again. stronger now, curling around me like smoke. But it wasn't just noise this time. I could understand it. The words slid into my mind as though they had always been there. You can't clean what was never meant to be erased. I staggered back, shaking my head, clawing at my ears. The whisper didn't come from the room. It came from inside me. The symbols on the wall shimmered, bleeding fresh across the plaster, spelling out patterns my eyes refused to hold. My chest tightened as I thought of my family. Was this thing inside me now? Had I carried it home already? The idea of my daughter hearing these whispers, of her innocent dreams turning into this nightmare, made me sink to my knees in terror. Then, as if in answer to my fear, the apartment groaned. Floorboards shifted, nails screeching, and from the broken plank in the center of the room, something began to rise. At first, I thought it was just liquid, bubbling upward like a spring, but as it pooled, it thickened, forming shapes, angles, outlines. My hands shook violently as I realized what it was becoming. A chair, a table, household furniture sculpted from congealed blood. The room wasn't just alive, it was remaking itself, piece by piece, replacing what had once been destroyed. A grotesque memory rebuilding in front of me. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape, but it slammed shut before I could touch it. The symbols across the walls flared brighter, and the whispers roared. They weren't just inside my head anymore. They were all around me, layered voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, crying out. And then I heard one that froze me completely. My wife's voice, calling my name. Tears stung my eyes as I spun, certain she was there, that somehow she had followed me. But the room was empty. Her voice echoed from the walls, distorted, broken, yet unmistakable. The apartment wasn't just showing me death. It was reaching into my life, stealing the voices of those I loved. I clutched my head, trying to shut it out, but the voices only grew louder. My daughter's laugh rang out next, high-pitched and pure, twisting into something dark, something wrong. I dropped to the floor, sobbing, begging for it to stop. The apartment obeyed, but only to show me worse. The wall in front of me began to shimmer, not with blood this time, but with reflection. My reflection, except it wasn't mine. The figure staring back grinned wide, teeth red, eyes blackened pits. And then it spoke, lips curling into the shape of my own mouth. "You've already brought it home." I collapsed backward, heart pounding so violently I thought it would burst. The words echoed inside me, sinking deeper than fear. If it was true, if I had already carried this home, then my wife and daughter weren't safe. And as the reflection smiled wider, I realized the blood wasn't the only thing that kept coming back. The apartment had marked me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, staring at the floor tiles as if stains might seep through them. My wife asked what was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. How could I? If I admitted what I saw, if I even spoke it aloud, it might follow her too. But silence was worse. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every drip of the faucet twisted my stomach. I couldn't shake the words from my reflection. "You've already brought it home." The terror wasn't in that apartment anymore. It was in me. By dawn, I knew I couldn't face it alone. I needed answers, or at least someone who would listen. The police had written it off years ago. My supervisor didn't care as long as the checks cleared, so I searched for someone who might know. The kind of person people whispered about but never called. That's how I found Dr. Harlan Vey, a parapsychologist, they called him. Half academic, half eccentric. Most people dismissed him as a fraud. But desperation makes you believe in things you once mocked. I dialed his number with shaking hands. He listened without interrupting as I poured out everything. The stains, the whispers, the reflection. His silence unnerved me. But when I finished, he spoke calmly, as if none of it surprised him. "You need to take me there," he said. "Some places remember, some places feed." I almost hung up, terrified of letting anyone else near that apartment. But his voice had weight, steady in a way mine wasn't. Against every instinct, I agreed to meet him the next night. When we arrived, the building looked different to him than it did to me. "It's thin here," he murmured, running his hand along the crumbling brick. "Walls between things. Too thin." His words chilled me, as though he was confirming something I'd feared all along. Inside, the smell hit us instantly. Harlan flinched, covering his nose. "It's not rot," he whispered. "It's residue. What's here doesn't want to be forgotten." I stared at him, horrified to realize he wasn't dismissing me. He believed every word. We set up his equipment, recorders, sensors, cameras with night vision. The room felt smaller with each device blinking faintly in the dark. The stains were already there, spreading wider than ever, climbing the walls like roots of some underground tree. Hours passed in suffocating silence. The recorders clicked, the cameras hummed. Nothing moved, nothing dripped, nothing whispered. For a moment, I thought the apartment was mocking me, showing me horrors only I could see. Then one of the sensors spiked violently, a shrill tone piercing the air. Harlan's eyes lit with something between awe and fear. "It's responding to you," he said. "It knows you. It's bound to you." My chest tightened, panic rising. And then, as if to prove his point, the whisper returned. Not faint, not hidden, loud, everywhere, drowning the room. Harlan froze, staring at the recorder as it captured words only I had heard before. "You can't clean what was never meant to be erased." The playback was worse. The whisper on tape wasn't mine. Not exactly. But it carried my cadence, my rhythm, like a distorted version of myself. Harlan's face paled as he replayed it, his hand trembling slightly. "It's not just mimicking you," he whispered. "It's taking you." I wanted to smash the recorder, destroy the evidence, pretend it never existed. But Harlan stopped me, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "If it's claiming you," he said, "we need to know why, and what it wants." Before I could respond, the lights cut out. Not just in the apartment, outside too. The city beyond the window fell black, a silence swallowing everything but the sound of dripping. But this time, it wasn't from the floor or the ceiling. It was from the recorder. A wet splatter echoed in the room as the recorder oozed liquid red and thick, dripping onto the boards. Harlan stumbled back, muttering under his breath. The apartment didn't just remember. It consumed, it turned anything inside it into part of itself. In that moment, I realized Harlan hadn't come to save me. He had come to study it, to understand it. But I didn't want understanding. I wanted escape. Yet when I looked at him, I saw something in his eyes. A hunger, almost mirroring the apartment's. And that's when I realized the truth might be worse than the stains, worse than the whispers. Because Harlan wasn't here to help me break free. He was here to see how far the apartment could go. The room pulsed around us, alive, breathing. The stains widened, reaching toward Harlan's boots, curling like fingers. He didn't move. He only whispered, awestruck, "It's choosing." And in the sick glow of the apartment's veins, I realized it wasn't choosing him. It was choosing me. The walls quivered as if the apartment itself inhaled. The red stains pulsed, veins alive with some unseen rhythm. I pressed myself back against the doorframe, praying it would hold. Harlan, though, didn't flinch. His eyes gleamed, transfixed, like a child staring into fire. "Do you see it?" he whispered. His voice cracked, trembling, not with fear but reverence. "It's not haunting the place. The place is the haunting." His words tangled in my mind. The stains weren't remnants. They were the organism itself. The apartment was alive. The whisper came again, louder than ever, filling every corner. This time it wasn't one voice. It was many, layered over each other, speaking in fragments of pain, fragments of pleading. "We never left. We never left." The air grew damp, heavy with the metallic stench of blood. I gagged, covering my nose. But Harlan only leaned closer. "They're trapped," he murmured. "Not ghosts, resonances. This place holds them like an endless reel, playing back the violence forever." A sudden bang shook the room, like a fist against the wall from the inside. Dust cascaded down, coating Harlan's hair and glasses. He smiled. "It's waking up fully now. It knows it has an audience." The stains surged across the floorboards, spiraling in patterns that looked almost deliberate. For one horrifying second, I realized the shapes mirrored letters forming words. My name, smeared across the floor in crimson. Panic seized me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with an echo that rattled the glass. The knob twisted uselessly in my grip, hot to the touch, as if welded shut by invisible hands. Harlan didn't move. His expression was ecstasy, not terror. "You don't understand," he breathed, stepping toward the walls as they pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "It isn't taking from you, it's choosing you. You're its vessel." I shook my head violently, retreating into the corner. Vessel for what? My mind reeled, every instinct screaming that if I let it in, I wouldn't come back out. But Harlan's face glowed with feverish devotion. He wanted this. He wanted what I feared. The whisper turned into screams. Dozens of voices, all at once. Some begged for release, others warned me to leave. But buried beneath them was one clear tone. My own voice. It screamed, "Run." I clutched my ears, trembling. "You hear that?" I cried, desperate for Harlan to understand. But he only laughed. "It's not screaming at you. It's screaming through you. You're the doorway." The floorboards groaned, cracking as if something pushed upward from beneath. Thick liquid oozed from the seams, rising in puddles. The stains weren't just on the surface anymore. They were bleeding from the bones of the building itself. The stench became unbearable, choking me, forcing bile up my throat. I staggered, gasping for air, while Harlan stretched out his arms to the stains as if welcoming them. "Take him," he whispered. "Show me what you are." Something moved in the liquid. Not human, not animal, but shapes that writhed and clawed, desperate to climb free. Their outlines twisted like shadows that shouldn't exist. And all the while the walls whispered one truth. You can't clean what was never meant to be erased. I stumbled backward, my body shaking uncontrollably. My job had been about erasing horrors, making rooms clean again. But here, nothing could be erased. It wanted to spread. It wanted me to carry it. The stains reached my shoes, sticky, burning cold against my ankles. I kicked, but it clung to me, seeping into the fabric like oil. Panic exploded in my chest as I clawed at my legs. But the harder I fought, the deeper it sank. Harlan knelt before the spreading pool, pressing his palm into it. His eyes rolled back, lips trembling in ecstasy. "This is the truth," he moaned. "The world hides it, but it's been here all along, feeding, waiting." I screamed at him, begged him to stop, but the room swallowed my voice. The stains surged, pulling him closer, pulling me closer. And in the suffocating dark, I understood the second twist. This wasn't just a haunting. The stains weren't confined to the apartment anymore. Through my shoes, through my skin, they were crawling into me, claiming me inch by inch. My chest tightened as if something pressed against my ribs from the inside. And as my vision blurred, the last thing I saw was Harlan smiling, whispering like a prayer. "It's beginning." The apartment convulsed like a living lung, every wall bowing in and out with a wet, sick rhythm. The stains surged higher, crawling up the ceiling beams, dripping down in long, quivering strands. I couldn't tell if it was blood or something older, fouler, but it clung to me, pulling me closer to the heart of the room. Harlan stood in the center of it all, his arms spread wide as though in worship. His voice rose above the screams of the walls. "Don't fight it. Let it through you. It chose you." His face gleamed with sweat, his glasses fogged, but his smile was radiant, manic. I tried to wrench my feet free, but the stain had hardened like tar around my ankles. Every tug sent a burning cold through my bones, crawling upward into my chest. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the layered chorus of whispers. They were no longer warnings, they were commands. Stay, become, feed. A sudden vibration rattled the floorboards, a tremor rising like something massive shifting beneath us. The recorder in the corner sparked and died, its blinking light drowned in the growing tide. The apartment wasn't just alive, it was birthing something. From the pool in the center of the room, a shape began to push upward. At first it was only a bulge, a swelling mound of liquid that rippled like skin stretched too thin. Then slowly grotesque outlines formed shoulders, arms, a head that wasn't shaped for any human skull. Harlan dropped to his knees, weeping like a man seeing God. "At last," he whispered. "At last." His devotion terrified me more than the shape itself. He wanted this. He wanted me to be its vessel. The whispers grew into a roar. My own voice echoed among them, distorted, broken, repeating the same sentence. You can't clean what was never meant to be erased. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a vow, a binding. I clawed at my legs, tearing fabric, ripping skin, anything to break free. The tar cracked but didn't release me. The cold inside me surged higher, wrapping around my lungs, squeezing until every breath was a knife. My hands trembled violently as I searched for anything sharp, anything real to fight back. My fingers closed around a jagged shard of wood from the broken floorboards. It wasn't much, but it was something. I gripped it tightly, holding on as though it were the only thing keeping me human. The shape fully rose from the pool, towering, faceless, dripping with its own impossible weight. It leaned toward me, its head cocking unnaturally, as though studying its reflection in my trembling eyes. I felt it press against my mind. 1,000 memories flooding in that weren't mine. Murders, screams, rooms that had never been cleaned. Harlan laughed, tears streaming down his face. Do you see? It's all of them. Every act, every crime. It kept them here, and now it will use you to spread. The pressure in my skull built until I thought it would split me open. Images flickered behind my eyes. Stains blooming in kitchens, bedrooms, schools, hospitals. Every place I had ever cleaned. It wanted me to carry it everywhere, to make the whole world an unerasable crime scene. I drove the shard into my own thigh, a burst of pain cutting through the suffocating fog. I screamed, not in terror this time, but in defiance. The thing recoiled, just slightly, as though the taste of my pain had disrupted its rhythm. Carolyn shouted in fury, lunging toward me. Don't fight it, you'll ruin everything. His hands clawed for my shoulders, but I swung the shard wildly, slashing across his arm. He staggered back, blood blooming bright and human on the stained floor. The stains surged toward him instantly, wrapping his limbs, dragging him toward the pool. His screams turned to gurgles as the liquid climbed over his face, swallowing him whole. His glasses floated for a moment on the surface, then sank beneath the bubbling red. The room fell silent, except for the thing's breath, rattling through the air like rusted chains. It stared at me with no eyes. Yet I felt its hunger burrow into my chest. I realized the pain I'd inflicted on myself hadn't freed me. It had only made me taste sharper to it. The floor cracked open wider, and for a moment I thought it would consume the entire building. The figure leaned closer, its dripping hand reaching for my face. My grip on the shard tightened, my arm shaking violently. And in that frozen instant, I had to decide surrender to what it wanted, or drive the shard into my own heart before it could claim me. The whispers fell silent. The apartment held its breath, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart, echoing like a war drum inside the walls themselves. The figure's hand hovered inches from my face, dripping black-red liquid that hissed when it struck the floor. Time bent around us. My chest rose in shallow bursts, my knuckles white around the shard. One thrust could end it, one thrust could end me, but I couldn't move. My arms shook, my body frozen between terror and defiance. The whispers pressed against my skull, urging me to give in. You're already ours. You brought us home. You can't clean what was never meant to be erased. Then something strange happened. The figure's shape began to ripple, flickering like a broken projection. Within its shifting form, I saw glimpses, faces screaming, hands clawing, eyes filled with endless pleading. They weren't the monster, they were inside it. A wave of sorrow washed over me, deeper than the fear. These weren't just echoes, they were people, victims of violence swallowed whole, their last moments replaying forever in the apartment's veins. And now it wanted to add me to their number. Tears blurred my vision. I lowered the shard, but not out of surrender. I pressed it against my palm and squeezed until blood welled up. You can't have me, I whispered. I won't carry you. The thing leaned closer, its faceless head twitching. For a moment the whispers faltered, as if confused. My blood dripped freely, splashing into the pool. The surface rippled violently, as though rejecting something it couldn't claim. The entire apartment shuddered. Plaster rained from the ceiling, boards snapped beneath my feet. The stains recoiled from the walls, shrinking, retreating toward the pool as though dragged back by unseen chains. The figure staggered, its form collapsing into streams of liquid. I fell to my knees, gasping for air as the voices screamed in unison. Rage, pain, desperation, then silence. The pool sank into the cracks of the floorboards, vanishing as if it had never been. Only the stink remained, thick and sour in my lungs. Harlan was gone, not a trace left except his glasses, lying cracked near the center of the room. I stared at them, my chest hollow, knowing no one would ever believe what had happened here. I limped to the door. This time it opened easily, swinging into the hallway with a long creak. Outside, the city hummed as though nothing had happened. Lights glowed, cars moved. The world had carried on, blind to the horror locked inside that apartment. But as I stepped into the night, the whispers followed. Not loud, not violent, just faint. Like a reminder, a shadow at the edge of my hearing. We never left. Weeks have passed since then. I scrub my hands raw every day, but sometimes I still see the stains seeping through my skin. My wife says I twitch in my sleep, mumbling words I don't remember. Sometimes she swears she hears two voices in my throat. I never returned to that building, though part of me wonders if I left it too late. Maybe it isn't bound to the apartment anymore. Maybe it's bound to me. The stains haven't appeared in my home yet, but I wake every night listening for them. And sometimes, just before dawn, I smell that same metallic rot. I follow it into the kitchen, where the tiles gleam under the dim light. And there it is, a faint red shimmer, spreading outward, waiting for me to notice. I kneel, scrubbing until my fingers bleed. But no matter how hard I clean, the stain always returns, always waiting, always growing. Now I understand the cruel truth. I was never hired to clean crime scenes. I was hired to keep them contained, to hide the evidence of a hunger that never ends. Harlan saw it as revelation. I see it as a curse, and when I close my eyes, I hear them, the trapped voices, the pleading faces, calling out to me from inside the walls, begging me to join them. So I'll ask you, if the stains appeared in your home, seeping from your floor, whispering your name, would you try to clean them, or would you let them take you?